You have to be just adaptable to whatever the changing environment is, just like any animal that's out there. It survives by being adaptable, and you just got to be hungry to learn. And most people stop learning after they're done with college or university. So you got to change that mindset.
The older you get, you need to have more of a push to actually upskill yourself and use things like better prompts.
You can build out something that would have taken a year of development with 20 people. Now you can do it yourself in like a month or a week. But it's still just is that product have any value? Because there's 50 other people can do the same now.
Everybody, welcome back to another episode of Make an Impact podcast. I'm your host, Makoto Kern. I'm here with Joe and Brindley.
Howdy.
Hey guys, and for today's topic, I think this is a really big one, an important one, especially for you parents out there, or university or almost university students that are studying and trying to figure out what should I do and how do I future-proof my career for the next 5 to 10 years? What degrees are going to be obsolete because of AI, and what kind of careers will thrive along with AI? And so in the recent news, we have the NVIDIA CEO who brought up something really important, and same with the CEO of Fiverr as well. They both brought up some really interesting points. I'll start off with the more negative one, which I think is from the Fiverr, who basically says that, you may get replaced. You're probably going to get replaced unless you keep up with the technology. And that was something that was leaked in an email by them or by him. That was an interesting leak. I'm sure it scared a lot of people in their industry. But also with the NVIDIA CEO, what I read about that was really interesting is basically said it's the ability to prompt very well and using it really, really well alongside with what you're doing. I think an interesting point that I saw was, it's not the people get replaced by AI, but it's the people who don't use AI will get replaced by people who use AI. I think that's a really important point, and
Absolutely.
Being able to prompt and do those things are, I think, really.
Yeah, it's a good quote.
And it's also kind of pushing yourself out of, I think we're probably going to, people that have been in the job market for longer. I was listening to an event with Sam Altman, and he was talking about how they were looking at the demographics that use ChatGPT. They're saying that it's so fundamentally different. Someone in their 50s versus sort of 30s and 40s versus 20s in how they actually utilize ChatGPT. The older you get, the more you're sort of looking at it like a search engine, unless you're not plugged in. He's saying, and we've touched on this before in other podcasts, but the younger users sort of in their 20s are literally hooking it up to all their files. They're using the memory, and they're almost basing every single decision off of what ChatGPT guides them on. So I need to make a career choice. What does it say? I need to respond to someone in a certain way. What does it say? How is it looking at all the files and the memory it's built up around them? So such a massive shift from, where you look at someone, that's just saying, okay, well, how do I reset the cache on my browser?
Yeah.
It's interesting. And I think that's where there needs to be the older you get, you need to have more of a push to actually upskill yourself and use things like better prompts and
you're saying that
more.
Younger people are like using it better than older people. Do you think it's a good idea that they ask? We've gone through this before too, but basically ask it how to reply to someone. What do I do? Should I take this job? Relying on it a lot.
I don't know whether it's better, but I think it highlights how they're a lot more in tune with how AI tools are used. And if we're looking at the job market specifically, and that becoming a requirement for jobs, you've got a lot more, it used to be your computer literacy. Now it's, well, how computer literate and AI literate are you? And I'm just saying that sort of generation is a lot further ahead than older generations who are maybe slower to adopt.
Is this something new though, or is it just this has always been the case if you think about it, right? Like when computers first came out, and suddenly now it's like there's Windows and young people are jumping into Windows and we're like understanding it really well, but like older generations like couldn't really figure out how to click around and open files and save things, and they'd lose their files all the time. And I'm just trying to think, like, taking a step back, is AI any different from any new kind of technology coming in? It's obviously a big game changer in that it's a huge, power creep, power curve to like suddenly start using it as opposed to someone who's not. But I do wonder if is anything fundamentally different from it.
So if you look at the AI tools and just being sort of a factor of AI literacy, I think that's where it comes in terms of what is the competitive advantage for younger generations who are more plugged in. I think this is something that Sam Altman brought up. He's saying, well, look at older people with smartphones. It took ages to
Yeah.
figure out, how you can click and swipe, and they caught up, but there was
Yeah.
a much faster adoption by younger generations.
So I guess the question is, as I was saying earlier, like technology always moves forward. Older generations do fall behind, no matter what the technology is, moving to computers with interfaces, to smartphones, to the internet and things like that. I wonder though if what he's trying to bring up here is that AI is a larger game changer than those technologies. Like, being a bit slow with using your smartphone is one thing, but it won't really affect your job that much or your career. And someone who's using AI effectively versus someone who's not, there's a way bigger gap there, way more sort of
Well,
noticeable.
I think I'm making the link to jobs. It wasn't necessarily, he was just
Okay.
discussing how different it was in each generation. And I'm just bringing it
Yeah.
back, really saying, if we're looking at
Mm.
employment and what Makoto was saying about, you know, almost these AI skills being a defining factor in, whether you're hired or not,
Yeah.
it's definitely a bigger push if you're in the job market at the moment, upskill
Yeah.
yourself
Without question.
and
Mm.
understand how you can improve your efficiency, because we're there now. The tools are right there, ready for you to make your job a whole lot more efficient.
Yeah, definitely.
Some interesting stats just to bring up is they're saying by 2030, 70% of the skills used in most jobs will change, with AI emerging as a significant driver. And
Yeah.
the role of artificial intelligence engineer is among the fastest growing jobs in 15 countries. That's a pretty interesting stat. I think another one is um, over 10% of professionals hired today have different job titles that didn't exist in 2000. In the US, this figure is 20%. So,
Wow. That's huge.
Hmm.
yeah.
That's crazy.
So,
Yeah.
just the rapidness of how things are changing. It's hard to know exactly what to pinpoint. Like, this job is not going to be obsolete in 10 years or 5 years.
Yeah.
It's just almost impossible to determine that now. But I think some strategies around the education is really helpful to know. And I think that's something that, where you're combining multiple fields. I think it's like the master of all versus jack of all trades. You almost have to be a master of all trades, where you're combining technology, computer science or engineering, psychology, and design. This is something that is much harder to automate all three, or you're able to be the kind of dot connector between all three is
Mhm.
really important.
I think something that we've spoken about before as well is critical
Yeah.
thinking, and just skills like that are going to be so important. But I guess if we steer the conversation and say, if you're in high school now, or you're about to go to university and you're thinking, do I study something, don't I study something, if we look at both of those aspects, it would be
Yeah.
interesting to unpack, well, what would be the reasons to actually study something now?
Mhm.
You're often taking on a lot of debt. Is there something that's worthwhile doing now? And I think from some of the research I did, you've obviously still got foundational knowledge, which is really beneficial. So if you're looking at things like computer science, AI ethics, design thinking, sustainability, cognitive science, psychology, they're all probably really helpful modules of knowledge almost that you could take forward and apply them, to sort of changing AI. But then on the flip side, you look and you say, well, chances are the job that you're going to be going into, if you're interested in sort of computer science, probably hasn't even been created yet. By the time you finish your
Yeah.
study, enter a workplace, it could be starting. So do you say, well, you're not going to incur that expense now of a university education. And I think, Makota, you had some interesting stats on the sort of ROI and how that's changing, which could be good to bring up in terms of, I think some of your research had sort of touched on, how traditionally you would study a defined set of skills and that would be good for your career. You're set. It's not going to change that much. And it's been sort of coming down to, your skills are relevant for 5 to 10 years. And I think it was now one of the stats you had, it was even 3 to 5 years, how relevant your skills are before you actually need to adapt.
Wow.
And that's big. If you've got a massive student loan and you're actually having to study something, completely new, is it better to maybe go into the industry and just, be an intern or something for a year to figure out what the industry is like, where it's going, maybe study after that, or maybe build up skills that are actually going to take you, on that sort of trajectory to potentially a career that hasn't been defined yet.
Yeah,
Mm.
I mean, I just see, from my kind of career arc, it's been interesting where I started off as a robotics engineer and did that for about a decade. And then basically everything was outsourced to China from the United States. Education for me wasn't as expensive as it is now. I think the average cost in the United States for university, you're looking between $30,000 to $70,000 a year just on the university. I mean, that will break most people's banks trying
Mm,
to do that, or you
Yeah.
graduate with loans in the two, three, $400,000, which is just, I mean, you're paying that debt off forever unless you
mm,
have a very high paying job. That kind of hole, the hole that you're digging, you have to be just adaptable to whatever the changing environment is, just like any animal that's out there. It survives by being adaptable, and you just got to be
mm,
hungry to learn. And most people stop learning after they're done with college or
Yeah.
university.
mm,
Yeah.
So
It's a good point.
you got to change that mindset.
Yeah, I think it also comes down to, I don't know, the way you view university, what you want to get out of it. If you're someone who's going in and your goal is just to get that piece of paper, right? You're just in and out. Then what we're trying to say here is that piece of paper may not be too applicable going forward because there's so much disruption in the industry. It may not be relevant anymore. So I think there's two ways to sort of look at that. First, I think university shouldn't be viewed as just that piece of paper. I think it does, technically, all universities are different. Some are good, some are bad, but at least the good ones are kind of meant to teach you more than just what you're getting out of it from that course alone. It's kind of meant to be teaching you to work with other people, right? Like student groups,
Hmm.
work on projects, process information, research information, and you're going to get graded on your research, right? So it means like you get given a topic, you go out, you study it, you research it, you put together a paper, you present that paper. It's meant to be graded. And it's all just about it's sort of training you how to process information. I think is a large part of it. A bad university would be like, here's a textbook, memorize it, right? That's not going
Yeah.
to
mm,
really do anything for anyone. But the good universities, I do think, do teach like critical thinking, teaches cooperation, team like work,
mm,
like understanding, like going, and also it's like tackling a big project, right? Because up to this point in your high school career, whatever, you've got your homework, your little bits and pieces, you got your big exams, but you never really like tackled a big project. Like this is a big thing. It's like your thesis or like some big sort of thing that you got to work
mm,
towards that could take months. And you never really encountered that in your life to that point. So I do think you sort of gain skills out of working on those sort of bigger projects too, especially with people. So if we're trying to like, if this whole conversation is around like, would we recommend at this point in time someone goes to study? I do think you have to look at it from that side. The other side is that I would recommend is don't try and study something very niche and very specific. Like don't put all your eggs in one basket of, okay, I'm going to study X, and trying to think of a good example, but like some very niche specialized field that could get replaced, right? Because you just
Basket
basically double
weaving.
down on some yeah, yeah, yeah. Something like, I don't know, something that could easily get replaced by AI, I guess what I'm trying to say. Like maybe some, I don't know. I have to think of a good one. Maybe you guys can,
mm,
but something that technically could very easily get replaced by AI wouldn't be a good one to go for. I would study something a bit more generalistic. Even a computer science degree, it does teach you like a whole bunch of fundamentals across computer science. It's not just like, oh, well, this is how you program. Maybe that would be a
mm,
bad thing to do, right? If you're just going into university and you're just studying programming and that's all you do. You don't look at anything else around the industry or try and, get into the technical side of it or, the engineering side of it. that would be, a risky move. I would rather go for a more generalistic computer science degree that teaches, across the board a whole different set of fields, and sort of allows you when you leave university, you have that piece of paper, but you kind of have a good overview. Like you're kind of like, again, as you were saying earlier, it is kind of a jack of all trades, but at least you can pivot then really easily around to where you need to be. You're not kind of like narrowly focused to something that could not exist anymore by the time you finish.
Mm,
Yeah, I think something from the physical side of things where it's not all software driven. Anything that you have
mm,
to work with your hands definitely has a more lifespan. Obviously, everybody's working towards Tesla with the Optimus robot, Boston Dynamics. They have all these really crazy
mm,
dexterity robots, and I think that's something where that's probably farther out, but at least I think from the physical side of things, if you can kind of combine whether it's like blue collar work and combine AI with that or construction or things like that, I think there's still a an advantage there where that can work in conjunction with AI because that's traditionally very
mm,
physical and more old school in the way they approach technology.
mm. And it maybe depends on what you're looking for as well, because if you think there probably aren't courses on some of the emerging technology now, whereas you could actually, be teaching yourself a lot of those and be a trailblazer in those fields, especially as AI kind of connects you more and more into sort of working with different technologies. And even if you get micro sort of qualifications from a lot of the universities. I think there's so many things to factor in there. And I agree with you, Joe. I think communication skills and then also the networks that you make. Do
Yeah,
you
yeah,
do you meet the
exactly. It's a
people
big
that
one.
you're going to go into business with? Do you
Mm,
have the mentors that can steer you?
yeah.
Exactly. Where you need to go in life. So I think there are a lot
Mm,
of benefits there, but it's really up to the person to see
yeah.
what they're interested in, and maybe it's even a hybrid approach of working and learning at the same time, to sort of steer your
Mm.
the direction of your career as you learn more about certain things.
I think an important point is to tell you which jobs are most vulnerable just within the next few years. And what's interesting in our research is that, what's happening right now, you could break it down into kind of they call the first wave, what's already happening. And, that's everything from data entry, content moderation, basic copywriting, and social media management are all seeing like 20 to 40% declines in job postings and
I'm
Mm,
surprised
opportunities.
about the social media management. You'd think they would need a human touch more than the others.
I think that's where people are calling AI slop, where you're able to
Okay.
automate a lot more, but it's just going
Okay.
to be a
It
lot
just
more noise.
generates
Yeah.
and posts a bunch of junk. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I
Mm,
think being able to be more unique, something that is more real, is going
mm,
to outpace all the AI slop that's going to probably be coming out. Thank God we've got Brinley, who's completely AI generated, who's talking right now.
precisely. That's what I'm here for.
The second wave that
Clone
they
him.
said that
Clone him 10 times. It would be good.
so the second wave within the next year or two, they said is entry level accounting, basic legal research. That's interesting because I've got friends that are in the have their own law firms, so having
Mm,
their own paralegals, they can do a lot more with less because
Mm,
that's very time consuming. Reviewing documents and law and the cases, just being able to quickly speed through that. That's you're cutting down on the amount of paralegals you need. And they said medical coding, uh, first level customer service. We know that. I mean, that's the chat bots and help that you're trying
mm,
to at least get them through that first point of safety before they start to hit somebody who's real.
mhm.
And then, as you guys know, the routine software development tasks. If you can leverage that and it's spitting out something that's actually good and not hackable,
mm,
that's something that can help. It's a force multiplier, basically. It's what that helps with. Third wave is the next 3 to 5 years. So they're saying that the advanced language models combined with specialized tools can significantly impact roles like, again, paralegals, market research analysis. That's interesting because I've definitely use AI for just market research on competitors, things like that, and trying to find things that would take me hours to do my own research on by just doing Google searching. Financial advisors, that's an interesting thing to just, maybe not investments yet, but definitely for sure, like how, where should I put my, money? How should I invest? I
Mm.
mean, I think a lot of the messages
Yeah.
are pretty much the same.
That is an interesting one. And I do, yeah, I'm really interested to see where that goes. Because if you're using AI to sort of guide you in a certain direction, you'd think that
Mhm.
same AI is going to guide everyone in the same direction.
Yep,
In which case, it just dilutes the value of things in a way when you're looking at shares and things like that.
that's true.
Yeah, interesting to see where that goes. Yeah.
Yeah, we won't get into the whole, like, there's definitely
Yeah.
emotional things of trading that maybe it's good to get you out of it, because that's where people make the most make the most errors when they start to get emotional with their stock trading. But yeah, I think the next one is really important, is graphic designers. I think it sounds like it's more for routine work versus, like creating a full blown app, which, some of them are doing now with vibe coding, but I've played around with those as well, and they're just okay. You have to be very good at what you do as a UX designer to leverage that as kind of a thought starter versus this is
Mm.
all I need and it's going to create an app for me. I think the
Mm.
in conjunction with kind of that is the ability to copy good ideas. Like if there's a website and it's like it does a certain thing, you're like, oh, I want that. I want to do that same thing. You're able to replicate that very quickly, somebody else's idea, especially if it's like an e-commerce idea, like, oh, this flow that they've done. You can really
Mm.
easily copy that because it's a very smart idea. And so being able to fend off competitors, you have to stay ahead of the game much
Mm.
faster. So your acquisition and being able to like really create things that are frictionless, I think that's where the skill set's going to be, because as you lower that barrier of entry, the competition grows exponentially. So you have to do other things to stay ahead of it. And they said general medical diagnosticians. Is that a real word?
Interesting. I haven't heard that one. Yeah.
But I'm assuming it's like when you're looking at
Mm.
X-rays and things like that. Those
Yeah.
things. I know I've heard that even AI from 2 years ago, ChatGPT was outperforming doctors.
Yeah.
So I
Mm.
can only imagine
Yeah.
now or in the next 3 years.
Mm.
We talked about the next wave, 5 to 7 years. That's the humanoid robots. What can be done there? Repetitive motions, cleaning, things like that. It's going to be interesting.
It
So
I
is,
do wonder
especially when you
though.
start seeing them. Go
what's
ahead,
that?
Jim.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I do wonder though if it'll ever get to that price point. I mean, a robot surely is always going to be more expensive than a human.
No,
I don't
but
know,
what is
maybe at
its
scale.
lifespan? Well, look at
Yeah,
it.
it's just
It's
like,
cost a company. You buy something, at if it's mass produced. I don't know what the price point is, but let's say it's $100,000, and
yeah,
that robot can work 24 hours a day with only needs maybe 2 hours in the day to recharge. So construction, anything like that, it can go, or warehouse, management, like
yeah,
pulling things, and it can just go, and it doesn't have sick leave. It's a
yeah.
scary thought
Mm,
that it is going to pay off, and it is going to be cheaper once that robot is. Maybe it takes 2 years to break even with a normal employee, but you've got
Yeah.
less risk, and then it's got a lifespan of 5 years, and you're good for the next 5 years. You're running at, at
I
much less
think I think some of that.
cost.
What's interesting is that now the robo taxi is going to be released soon in Austin and California.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be a dynamic shift in where if that works out, Tesla's going to basically become an Amazon and replace a lot of industries. One thing is parking lots, and you've got all these vast parking lots. If you can just call a car up and it's cheaper to own, you're not going to own a car anymore. So
Mm.
maybe you might shift that towards owning your own humanoid robot, which should be
Mm.
interesting. And if they could get that price down to like 20, 30,000, you're like, okay, let me
Mm.
get a robot that can, I don't need to hire a babysitter. I don't need to hire, a chef or this or that or a cleaner.
Mm.
I mean, then the ROI starts to be like, okay, I rather own my own robot versus a car that just gets me from here and there once in a while.
Exactly. And it's going to be wild when you start seeing more and more robots actually entering society. It's really like the sort of sci-fi that we've grown up watching, and it's it's going to be here. And I think looking at some of the ones, I know that fourth wave you mentioned was sort of 5 to 7 years from now.
I'm curious, in video games, cheat codes let you skip months of grinding to unlock special abilities instantly. Have you ever wished for something similar for your software challenges? What if there's a way to instantly access 20 plus years of specialized expertise instead of developing it all internally? What if you could solve in weeks what might otherwise take months or years? Would you agree that most organizations face a steep learning curve when implementing new software solutions? At my company Impact, we serve as that cheat code for companies looking to transform complex software into intuitive experiences that users love and that drive real business results. Would it be valuable to explore? And how might this work for your specific situation? Visit impact.io for a free strategy session focused on your unique challenges.
I wanted to just touch on some of the things like 10, 15, 20 years, which is interesting, and sort of seeing how that looks as well. So looking at 2035, 10 years from now, as a potential job disruption tipping point. So you start seeing entire roles just vanishing. So not just the tasks anymore, not just, we can do all these tasks and you still need people. So you've got entire roles just being automated, and a kind of convergence of blue and white collar workers. So things like warehouse work, logistics, factory roles, all autonomous or mostly autonomous. And you've got your sort of middle skilled jobs are completely hollowed out. So creating a sort of social pressure for policies that a lot of people think are inevitable. So the universal basic income, or things like AI dividends. So kind of in that time, seeing job shifts of a decline in your sort of customer service agents, your truck drivers, your radiologists, your analysts, and a rise in sort of automated supervisors, or robotic maintenance, all things that are, I guess, a lot of more human driven. Because also, if you look at, well, what are the characteristics that are potentially going to make a job safe? So you think things like, creativity, your sort of judgment, your adaptability, but then you come down to empathy. And you think empathy is something that you want to express even with a customer service agent. If you've got someone really good, they can empathize with, with how you're feeling, or if you have a medical consultant, and you're suffering with an illness, you've got that sort of empathy. But that's probably short-term safeguards, if you've got those qualities. But what does it mean when you start looking 10 years out and you've got robots that are pretty good at actually expressing what seems like empathy, and you feel like they're heard and they're always available? And then you start looking at 15 years from now, so 2040. So you look at potentially things like governments and companies are being forced to rethink their economies. You may see things like some nations pioneering 4-day work weeks, or job sharing, or even things like citizen work credits. And that's going to be felt on the most advanced countries. So the States, maybe United Kingdom, Japan, China, all the sort of very first world are going to probably have to solve these first. And then looking at things like most services are AI enabled. So you've got your personalized education, your virtual doctors, your AI legal aid. And then really at that stage, your creativity and how you handle relationships or interpersonal skills probably becomes core to what it means to have a job, because it's not doing things. And that's what I found. I'm busy reading the psychology of money. And it's just so interesting how they say, if you look at work in the 50s, 60s, more of the sort of times when you were working to output something, that was your job. You worked, let's say, on a manufacturing plant and you built cars, and you were there and you're working your 8-hour shift, and you were measured by how much you output. And then slowly it shifted more and more to an immeasurable one, which are all more difficult to measure in terms of, how much you're processing mentally, things like creative jobs or even management.
Yeah.
You start thinking about those, and it's not as quantifiable as, well, you built 50 cars this month. It's like, no, you helped create this idea or push this business strategy. And I think that's probably what's, it's becoming more and more, well, what it means to have a job then in 50 years is how good are you at being creative or at dealing with people, making
Yeah.
things work and connecting, people together. So
Yeah,
that's pretty interesting.
I like what Joe's point about working in groups on a project. I think that's a very important thing where I've seen, and we've homeschool our kids. I've thought about, and I've done like project based learning where you see alternative schools, they do that and they push that, where you're working on teams and you're trying to realize who's doing what, who's a good person at being very niche at some certain tasks, very OCD, very organized. You got some that are they're the thinker, you got the ones that are the leaders. So you kind of see who kind of like comes together, and you see the dynamics of the group. And I think that being able to hone in on that in whatever you do and teaching that is so important. Because whenever I put um my kids on a task and how they work together, how they fight, how they get along, how they not, it's a little dynamic that you see. But the ability also, I mean, obviously now we got, the big thing is AI agents, and I think it's probably along the same. I think it was Sequoia who had this big AI conference, or it's a small one within their group, but it was very interesting where they talk about the AI agents, where you're going to have now maybe the one person trillionaire or $1 trillion unicorn, and all he has is, or she has is AI agents running all these different things and tasks. They're able to work together. They almost become their own neural network, working together. I don't know how far along that's in the future, but that being able to do that and create those things would be
What do you think?
interesting to see.
It is interesting, though, just how you can see profit margins coming down. So, things become so much more competitive because, as you say, if you
Hmm.
have one person running a company that is, a lot of AI agents doing the work. Previously, you had to, let's say it's a development company, you would have a handful of developers, you'd have a marketing person, a designer. Now they're all just agents. So, that industry becomes, you can get a custom built app for a hundredth of the price that you could before.
Yep.
It's going to be interesting to see how that, shapes it, and also
It's like, again,
manufacturing.
as you mentioned earlier, it's just going to come down to creativity again, right? Because like anyone can
Mm,
now run a company and have these AI agents that
mm,
sort of build out some software products. But okay, great. You can build out something that would have taken a year of development with 20 people. Now you can do it yourself in like a month or a week.
mm,
But it's still just is that product have any value? Because there's 50 other people can do the same now, and so
Yep.
the drive of that product goes way down. Not again, it comes back to what you're saying, but around creativity, you can't just sort of the value isn't you being able to create the thing anymore. It's what's special about it, like what's unique about it.
mm.
Why is it solving that nothing else has solved yet? And as you both have sort of mentioned, yeah, it's going to come back to that sort of human approach of being able to sort of be creative and come up with those novel ideas more than just the pure output of something. Very
Exactly.
different
And
way of sort of approaching things. Like hard work isn't going to be the driving factor
mm,
anymore of being successful in a traditional sort of way.
I guess it raises a question, and we could ask: is soft skill mastery the new hard skill? And you think you go and you study things or you work on creating hard skills. How do you do this process? What are the skills you need? But are the soft skills that we need to master things like empathy, communication, leadership? And
Yeah,
it's so interesting. Just coming back to this book, Psychology of Money, it it looks at also how you take certain sort of skills or talent. So you think smart people, you have one smart person in the town, and this is 50 years ago, and they can do incredibly well because they're the smartest person there. But now, with the internet, things are expanded. So maybe now you start competing about, you know, are you the smartest business owner in your certain state that you're in? And now it's global. Are you, the smartest person? It's like, no, there are lots of smart people.
Hmm.
They're a dime a dozen because you have, access to a global pool of talent. But it's all those other soft skills that make them particularly effective. Are they a good leader? Are they a good team player? And it suddenly becomes there are all these other skills that are being sort of amplified. If we had to say, what should you be focusing on to future proof your job? It's, how good are you at all those other pieces, not necessarily the hard
Yeah.
skills, those soft skills.
I guess if you're the sort of person who feels like their job is, I go to work, I just greet one or two people, I sit down in front of my computer and I work all day with headphones on, don't talk to anyone,
Mm.
barely communicate, leave at the end of the day and job well
You might
done.
be obsolete
Cool. You may
soon.
have yeah, you may have gotten away with that to this point, but yeah,
Mm.
as you guys say, and I agree. If you're doing that kind of work, that means that work can be automated in some way or could be easily, AI driven because it doesn't require any kind of human skills to do it. It's definitely a risk.
I
Yeah, I
wanted to
think.
jump to, go ahead, Dakota.
No, I was going to say if we want to jump to another thing is the actual recommended university majors that maybe we could
Hmm.
kind of bring up
Well,
and
I
Yeah,
kind of
wouldn't
point
mind
out
interesting.
just
there.
jumping,
Interesting.
just doing, finishing off with the 20 years. We did like 10,
Yeah, oh
15.
yeah.
20 years is really interesting, and looking at something like a post work transition. So you look at AI is general enough to do pretty much anything. It performs any at least knowledge task better, faster, cheaper than anyone human can. What does that mean? I mean, does it mean that something like a new social contract would emerge where you've got universal basic income and work is going to be optional for many? But people that contribute, it's really about doing something for the sake of doing, for the its purpose that it offers you, for its meaning and the creativity as well, and those things taking center stage. So
Yeah.
people working with AI to focus on things like climate resilience or philosophy or exploration or even improving care for people and the human experience. It's so interesting to think that in 2 decades' time, we could be looking at a landscape where jobs aren't compulsory to survive anymore, and they're optional to contribute something that you feel is something you were born to contribute. It's going to be really interesting to see that.
Yeah, I'm very, it's going to be very interesting to see how governments react though, right? Because when you're talking
Mm.
about universal
Mm.
basic income and things like that, that means that people are going to have to be supported inherently to a certain degree by their governments, right? Very,
Mm.
very socialist in a
Hmm.
way. And, traditionally that's always been a lot of controversy around that. But, what's the alternative? Like a capitalist society, just, will it even still be able to function in a world where
Mm.
jobs, just the value of them has just been driven down so low that capitalism can't be held up
Mm.
by, traditional sort of workforces anymore? I don't know what the answer is, but
I almost feel like we're going to see the pioneers come out of. I always think a lot of the European countries, whether it's Switzerland, Sweden, they're often pioneering, especially with education. I wouldn't be
yeah,
surprised if we start seeing, some new economies emerge in those countries.
yeah,
My
definitely.
prediction, my prediction is is that they have a reproduction issue. I forgot the exact number, but if you have less than I think 2.5 kids in your country, your population is will be diminishing, and that's happening
Mm.
almost everywhere. And so, are we going to get to a point where people are just not going to have kids? We become less social, no more kids. We create androids or little robots that are running around, or is
Mm.
it we become a spacefaring technology and everybody just starts, space mining, exploration, things like that, because now you can send out robots and AI to do that, you know, and it doesn't matter if it gets hurt, injured, or destroyed or whatever. I think that's a whole nother industry within like 25 years that should be something that is emerging, and I think that will be interesting to see where careers go in that respect. But
Yeah, it
yeah,
will. It's the
we
next
could get into
frontier.
whole other topics with that one. But I think jumping to university majors, because that's really what, if anybody's listening, what should they get into? And that's where you're blending some technical proficiency with human centric skills. So some of the ones
Mhm.
that obviously are computer science, artificial intelligence. If you want to be into tech and you want to get into it, great, get into that. That's the bare bones basic things that you need to get into. You could study how things think and create neural networks and whatnot, and how to program those things. I think that'd be really cool to get into if you're into that aspect of it. Data science analytics, always numbers crunching, seeing where those things are, using that with AI. That's always interesting. Economics, whatever. I think that might be something to, if you really have a thing for numbers and how they work, I think that's something they really get into. Cybersecurity, that's something where we actually have clients that are in cybersecurity as well. And you just see whether it's the amount of crappy vibe coding or vibe coded applications are out there that probably could be easily hacked. It's probably going to accelerate. I think that fight in the future is going to be so key. And I
Yeah,
don't know
and
if you,
also
yeah, go
AI
ahead.
attack vectors, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
people using AI to penetrate security systems is going to become
Yep,
bigger too. So it's going to be a bit of an AI arms race in terms of just security alone.
for
Mm.
sure.
Definitely
I don't know
going
if you heard just
to.
in the news. I thought I read that Spain, their entire mobile network just went down after having a huge power outage a few weeks
Wow.
ago. I
Wow.
don't know
Mhm.
if that's true. Um, Curious if
Yeah.
that was a hack, but
Mm.
Yeah.
yeah, the entire mobile network supposedly went down across the country.
Wow.
There's solar flare, it could be whatever, but yeah, having the ability to like protect the infrastructures is key.
Mm.
and
Yeah.
and so yeah, the next one is biomedical engineering. Combining the engineering principles of medical science. That was really interesting because biomimicry is something that I've been kind of following, and I love hearing about that, where they're taking things that have been evolving for years and years, hundreds or thousands of years with animals, and then combining that with, like, I saw one where they took a look at a whale's fin and how it has ridges, and adding that to a windmill fan. You
Mm.
normally think of it being smooth, but actually when you have
Mhm.
ridges, it increases the efficiency. And being able to
Interesting.
combine those things, they used an engineer, somebody who was aerodynamic or a wind engineer or a plane engineer, and somebody who was very creative and just thought about, like, hey, I took a look at that and saw, like, why are there ridges on a whale's fin?
Mm.
And it was
Mhm.
pretty interesting. I said, oh, if you can do that stuff, that would be really
Mm.
cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Environmental science and sustainability. We know that there's pollution everywhere, plastics, whatever you name it. That's always a great cause to see if you can somehow get rid of those things and then really clean
Mm.
up the things that are happening
Mm.
out there. And I think these next ones are really important, especially around like business administration with the focus on technology management. So you're preparing students for leadership roles in tech driven industries. Yeah, knowing how do you manage all these different aspects of it. It's that jack of all trades type of dot
Mm.
connector. And then
Yeah.
education tech. You see teachers now. I mean, with my kids now, I've always asked my kids, like, how is the teachers integrating AI other than saying you can't use it because you're cheating on the test?
Yeah.
I actually tell
Yeah.
my kids, hey, use it to learn how to prompt it, because I feel like that's so important. It's like using a calculator or a spreadsheet or a computer or Google
Totally
search.
agreed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so I encourage that with them. But then as a
Yeah, I think
teacher, oh, go ahead.
just thinking about that, like, yeah, banning AI material. If you're given a task and you can produce the required, output for that task, does it matter how you got it or generated it? As long as like you still did it, if you used AI to do it or went to a library and
Mhm.
took out a book or Google searched. I mean, I don't know, just kind of from an education perspective, I don't know. I always just wonder about that. Like, I don't
Yeah,
know.
Yeah.
it's probably changing the criteria that it's assessed on. Instead of saying like,
Mm,
well, you just generated this straight from AI, it's like, did you generate it in a way that actually answered the question? Or is there superfluous information in it? Maybe the tone
yeah,
is incorrect. It's almost like, did you manage to correctly generate what was needed and sort of
yeah,
understood the question? It should almost be,
yeah,
because whether you're, again, like you're saying, how did we do it? If we had to answer something, you would look through encyclopedias or textbooks, and then you would summarize that information.
mm,
Mhm.
And as long as you're doing it in a way that you're not just verbatim adding it, even if you are generating it, you've generated it in a way that is potentially answering the question. I don't know.
I
It's
guess
something
I guess the
interesting to.
assignments I guess the assignments themselves need to like go up to the next level too. You can't just ask your students to like, write me a report on Christopher Columbus, whatever the case is, right?
Mm,
And get a report on, this year he did this and then he went here and then he went there and end of
mm,
report. Like that's you can generate in 2 seconds. You're gonna have to start asking them to give you reports that show that they have maybe more understanding. Like, okay, what were the implications of what he did, and
Uh,
what are your thoughts on it? Do you think it was right or wrong what he did, or the things that do you think history should look fondly on him or negatively? Like maybe just trying to like get a bit more like thinking
Mm,
involved and not just outputting the report,
exactly.
so that generation alone won't get you there. You kind of have to have your own opinions about things. I think that's way more
Mm,
important than just content alone going
mm.
forward.
that's
That's
such
a
a
good
good
point.
point because it's like, well, instead of asking who Christopher Columbus was, say if you were him and you're
Mm,
back in those days, what route would you take to maximize your
yeah,
Mm,
costs and whatever? Like really get
yeah.
it down
Or
into those
if you
specifics.
had modern day technology, how could you do it differently? Just get them to
Yeah.
think out the box and things like
mm,
that. Yeah.
That would be really cool actually to do that. And it's interesting again
Mm,
to see the different levels of teaching now that my kids they all went to school this year, and to see the different types of teachers. Some who embrace tech, some that just, hey, all they do is teach directly from a book, completely
mm,
going to be
yeah.
obsolete. But
mm,
then you've got teachers that are managing a big classroom, and some kids learn at a faster rate than others. And it's like if you had an AI agent saying, "Hey, this kid is asking these type of questions to AI, there's something that they're not quite getting." And there's these
mm,
group of kids that are maybe more visual learners to other ones that are more analytical. So they're able to accelerate this way, or they're able to learn through video versus just talking. These are things that if you have something as a teacher trying to manage 20, 30, 40 students or more.
Yeah.
But you see that exactly. But I think what you'll find from good teachers as well is that it's those interpersonal skills coming in. Because if you're teaching multiple groups of students, so let's say you take 7 or 8 lessons a day, you've got a range of different age groups, and you've got a completely different group dynamic, especially in public schools where the bigger class sort of numbers. You've got a completely different dynamic from one class to the next, with certain people that will want to trigger the teacher, or certain people that want to learn faster. Or so
Mm,
being able to understand that, I think just coming back to those points of what makes you really good at something is being able to understand those students and then apply, as you're saying, Makoto, the technology to help each of them uniquely, but also to satisfy that unique group dynamic that class, that combination of kids together presents itself
mm,
as.
It's interesting too because I do let my kids, again, I tell them to use it. I have them use multiple AIs, and even my son now is able to pattern recognize outputs from certain AIs. He's like, oh, this is, you can tell it's AI generated because the amount of repeat of certain ways in which it says sentences. He's like, oh,
Mm,
that's Chat GPT,
mm,
and
yeah.
so they can recognize right away whenever something is AI generated, and they
mm,
immediately dismiss it as being less value, which is kind of funny.
mm.
And
Yeah.
so
Yeah, that is interesting.
I
Mm,
think the other final thing is on university majors is psychology and human factors. And human factors, we had this discussion about the AI pin and having this kind of AI friend. This is just
mm,
what, like less than a year ago that we had this conversation, and how that was weird, and it gets into the movie Her. I'm sure now, I mean, with the different, I mean, Grok has different personality traits, and you can start programming these things, and the ability to was it the Turing test to actually pass
mm,
that at a higher rate. So yes, there's probably areas in which you can talk to it, and maybe it'll help out certain people, but I think there's got to be that combination of an actual person and that human touch and factor. But then you can somehow leverage AI into making quicker diagnoses, or somehow visually seeing their body language or something to help you maybe focus on diagnosing somebody with whatever, or
mm.
understanding human behavior while you know you're having this AI help you with other things that are harder to maybe detect.
Yeah, agreed.
Mm,
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating, though. I think I always say that, but where it's headed, even just preparing for these podcasts and looking, through projections, it's fascinating. I mean, we're living through such a revolution. I think
Hmm.
that it's kind of like stay tuned and see what's going to happen.
for
Yeah.
sure. Cool. I think unless you have anything else to bring up, I think this is probably a good place to end this podcast.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
sounds
appreciate
good.
everybody's time.
Yeah.
Again, like and subscribe. And if you have any ideas on what education or questions on what you should go after or what you're into and how AI can help you, reach out and leave a comment. But thanks again for joining, and talk to you next time. Take care,
Go
everybody.
well.
Cool. Thanks.
Have you ever played a video game and discovered a cheat code that instantly unlocks abilities that would have taken months to develop? I'm curious, what would it mean for your business if you could access a similar cheat code for your software challenges? What if you could bypass months of trial and error and immediately tap into proven expertise? You know, I've noticed that many organizations spend years developing specialized software expertise internally, often through costly mistakes and setbacks. Would you agree that's a common challenge in your industry as well? At my company, Impact, we function as that cheat code for companies looking to transform complex software into intuitive experiences. Our clients gain immediate access to 20 plus years of specialized knowledge and an experience of launching hundreds of software digital products in many different industries without having to develop it all internally. You might be wondering, how does this actually translate to business results? Well, companies we work with typically see go-to-market times reduced by up to 50%, their overall NPS scores rocket up, and their product to development teams' efficiency significantly improved. Instead of struggling through costly mistakes, they accelerate directly to solutions that work. This is why organizations from startups to Fortune 500 partners with us for years. We consistently help them solve problems in weeks that might otherwise take months or years. If you're responsible for digital transformation or product development, wouldn't it make sense to at least explore whether this cheat code could work for your specific challenges? From boardroom ideas to code, this is what we do best. Visit our website at IIIMPACT.io. You can see the link below to schedule a free strategy session. It's just a conversation about your unique situation, not a sales pitch. And you'll walk away with valuable insights regardless of whether we end up working together. Thank you.